topic is the so-called Minecraft case, or Kansk case in the Kansk of Siberia. Kansk is a city of around 90,000 inhabitants, is in the Krasnoyarskiy region, center of Siberia. The closest bigger city with more than 1 million inhabitants is Krasnoyarsk. Kansk is 250 kilometers from Krasnoyarsk, not a very big city. And there are two young boys, Nikita Uvarov and Denis Mikhaylenko, who have been in jail since last summer. They are accused of being members of a terrorist group. And for example, they have, according to charges, they were planning to blow up. In some sources say that police building, other sources say that FSB building, but they were about to blow this up in Minecraft. So this is why it's been called Minecraft case. Obviously there is also some other proof, so it's a bit more complicated case, and it's interlinked to various issues. Like, for example, there is one secret witness against the guys, and it's possible that there is even entrapment by the FSB, which has been a quite typical strategy, or FSB or the police, and we don't actually even know who was originally initiating this investigation. And it's been quite common practice in Russia during the last years to entrap very young people, teenagers, to set up some online organizations and then demand some atrocious prison sentences. And this case is pretty much maybe worst of them, because these guys were last year when they were arrested. They were 14 years old, but now they have turned 15, and basically the prosecution is accusing them of establishing terrorist organization and studying in order to become terrorist. A maximal sentence of these charges, it's actually life sentence in prison. And in Russia, if you have a life sentence, you never go out. And then some quite hefty fines, for example, fine of 5 years income besides the prison sentence. The minimum sentence is 15 years, but as these guys are underage, according to Russian law, they may not get more than 10 years in prison. But you can imagine that for 14 years old, 10 years in prison, it's just kind of eternity. And yeah, and so what was basically Denis and Nikita doing? And there is also currently third guy facing the charges, Bogdan Andreevich, who is now in home arrest, cannot receive any correspondence. So altogether in this criminal case there are 3 young guys being accused, and then there are a couple of other people who are a bit older, but not very old, like 3 years older, who are as witnesses. And one of the witnesses is secret, so not at this point there is not much known about the secret witness. But basically they established an anarchist local group in 2019, and they were basically mostly exchanging some information and also planning activities. They were putting up posters for Azat Miftahov, who is the Moscow-based anarchist, who is currently accused of breaking a window in the demonstration and is in a threat of facing several years in prison. There is a separate solidarity campaign going for him. And also they were planning food and bombs action to distribute some food for homeless. And but also apparently studying some chemistry and discussing about being engaged in radical struggle against the police and FSB, but not much has happened in practice. Apparently some explosives were being prepared, but journalists are writing that the FSB tried to investigate how strong were the prepared explosives, but they couldn't even make any conclusions. So basically I wouldn't call this even a bomb, it's more like a firework. And as we know, it's quite typical of teenagers to prepare small explosives, and if you were wanted to put all the kids in jail, whoever were preparing some kind of explosives, you probably would have to jail thousands and thousands of kids. But now, because of quite ridiculous anti-terrorist and history, and because of this practice of police and secret services, in the Russian realities there is a system which is called the Polishnya system. It's difficult to translate, but it's obligation of different. It's kind of system where you basically, in any level of government organs, you have to deliver some results. And obviously, if you are working in the secret services, you have to delivering results is to find some terrorists or extremists, and providing investigations and opening criminal cases and putting some people in prison. So in Russian periphery, you can imagine some city in the middle of Siberia. You won't find any ISIS in this city. You maybe have a few Nazis, maybe not. Most likely in the 1,000-kilometer radius there is no any extremist movements, so they have to find out something. So they pick up this 14 years old who maybe are discussing some radical stuff online. And because in Russia every time that there happens some real terrorist attack, or maybe you could call them armed Islamist insurgency or something. I'm not a big fan of this terminology, even because terrorism, it's never very well defined concepts and it can be pretty much anything. So every time something is happening, they are putting more harsh sentences for terrorism, and at some point they just simply added 10 years to any kind of terrorist-related offense. So, and this is also what makes this case difficult, because basically these were young guys who were serious political activists, and they indeed shared anarchist worldview and wanted to be engaged in a sort of radical direct action, but also they were very young. Their understanding of the stuff was pretty, I could say, naive. Like they were, for example, discussing about developing a railgun. Railgun, in case you don't know, it's very science fiction experimental technology. It's like electromagnetic. It's basically kinetic gun shooting bullets, but with electromagnetic force. So some highly developed armies, like American army, has been developing this gun for 50 years, but they still haven't managed to have any practical working version of this thing. So, and we have some 14 or 16 or 17 years old kids discussing doing this kind of thing. So this is obviously very young people, but also doesn't mean that they don't have some serious political convictions. Like, obviously you also like to think that the security services or police are a problem in Russia. You don't have to be naive teenager or extremist. Most of the people, or at least huge part of the people in Russia, see problems in workings of police or security services. So it's pretty normal to discuss what to do with these existing problems. But this kind of direct action or armed struggle aspect, it's still kind of existing in this issue, which makes this case maybe not so interesting for many liberals, but also to say that these were completely apolitical people who were maybe entrapped by the FSB, it's also not correct. So there are quite many complicated layers in this case, but also it's obvious that in this way you could jail just huge amount of kids. And apparently even this city of Kansk, there is a tendency of, and Krasnoyarskiy area in general, and maybe even in Russia in general, there is now a tendency of police to entrap very young children. In Russia, the limit of criminal responsibility is 14 years old, so there are other cases that police has basically followed. Some kids who have, for example, discussed school shootings online, that they follow them many months, and immediately when they turn 14 years old, they arrest them, and they are charging them with some plannings to organize school shootings. So, which of course school shooting can also be a problem, but in Russia you don't really have so easy access to guns, especially if you are 14 years old. So often this is basically just talk, and this kind of very, how to say, cynical and brutal police strategies to combat this kind of issues doesn't necessarily make any good. So this Nikita and Denis, they were already arrested in June, but the information only began to spread in November. There were articles in the Baza and Novaya Gazeta, and my text, which I will publish tomorrow, is mostly based on article by the Insider, which is also online publication. It's also typical that in Russia now many critical press is only online journals. After arrested, Nikita and Denis, they have known each other since the kindergarten, and Bogdan Andreevich was friend of them from the junior high school, and they were all friends there. So, and actually the investigators, when no one had basically was aware of this case in very early phase, they were putting very heavy pressure on Denis and Bogdan, and eventually Denis and Bogdan, they admitted that they had been preparing a terrorist attack, because investigators were basically lying to them that if they admit the charges, they will not face serious sentences, which is obviously always a lie. Nikita, however, didn't confess anything, but doesn't accuse Denis and Bogdan, and Nikita is just believing that the responsibility is in the investigators. He's still considering both of them their friends. And also one aspect of the case is attitude of the school and the teachers, because actually Nikita's mother believes that the school played a big role of putting the boys in prison. And she's told that in the October 2019 he was invited to school to discuss with the teacher, and she pointed out that Nikita is interested of anarchism, of watching TV series of Mahno, which was aired in Russia a couple of years ago and is still easily available. A very melodramatic series, and the teacher was very somehow shocked about their interest to anarchism and said that maybe they are preparing terrorist attack. We should put this under control, and it's possible that this is the beginning of all the problems that actually it's possible that teachers were originally hinting about this guys to police or the security services. And Nikita's teacher actually wrote a negative personal statement about Nikita for the court, which was one of the reasons that he was not allowed to have home arrested, but he is in the remand prison. And the school social workers, in the opposite, was actually willing to write a positive, so-called positive characterization, which is plays quite important role in the Russian school system, but the school principal actually said that she shouldn't do it. And eventually the remand decision says that according to school's principal, Nikita considers school a hostile environment, doesn't react adequately to teachers' instructions, does not develop mutual understanding, refuses to follow the norms and rules of the society. So obviously no ever any teenager had these kind of problems, but if you are refusing to follow norms and rules of the society, you are immediately some terrorist who should be sent to 10 years in jail. And actually, according to Nikita's lawyer, the school workers maybe even key witnesses on the side of the prosecution in the court case which is coming up. And Nikita's mother has told that these problems in school started 1 year before the arrest, and teachers couldn't accept that someone who is 14 years old could actually have their own opinions. There was a story, for example, that in the English class, the teacher asked what's the highest building in the world, and Nikita answered that it's Burj Khalifa in the Emirates, in Dubai, which is actually correct answer. But the teacher didn't believe this and didn't accept the answer. Nikita started to argue with the teacher, and then the teacher just told him to shut up. So basically, maybe this is also some sort of example of extremism. But so, this is pretty much about the case. Hopefully there will be a bit more coverage in English. I think now abroad there has been pretty much coverage about Alexei Navalny case, but there are many other political prisoners in Russia. There are a number of anarchists, political prisoners in Russia, altogether hundreds of people considered as political prisoners by the Memorial Human Rights Organization, and after the recent demonstrations for Alexei Navalny, this amount is likely to grow. But it's important to pay attention to all the kinds of cases, especially this Kansk case, because this is also a good example of what kind of problems are involved in anti-terrorist hysteria and legislation and whole discussion of anti-extremism and so on. There is now a support campaign, address kanskydela.com, but unfortunately only has updates in Russian. Hopefully quite soon would have also some English materials. I will put to my blog tests and also actually to the YouTube and podcast also the addresses of Nikita and Denis, but obviously as they are in the remand prison, it's quite limited what you can write. You shouldn't write like very political stuff, but you can and also you should write in Russian, but nowadays fortunately Google Translates is working pretty well. Or you can just send the photographs or drawing. I could actually also put addresses to the chat now as well. But this I will put them to chat. But so that's pretty much everything this time. If I will keep the stream open like usual for some minutes in case there are some questions. And yeah, I don't know what would be my next topic in English, maybe not very soon. There are some economy topics I will be talking in Russian, and in Finnish I will actually next Monday, probably maybe in the weekend, but probably in the Monday, I will have another broadcast about Alexei Navalny, and this time about the discussion that took place last week mostly, and also this week about status of Alexei Navalny as a prisoner of conscience, why Amnesty withdraw this status, and what is actually what I think about it, and also how this relates to general strategy of Russian opposition on getting out of Putin, and what can be learned about some past movements. For example, the dissident movement of the Soviet Union, which has a long tradition of struggling for human rights in very difficult conditions, but which is already somehow forgotten both in Russia and abroad. But this is pretty much everything this time, and hopefully you will be around when I do some other broadcast in English.